December 18th, 1944, 3:20 a.m. At the edge of a woodland 12 kilometers southwest of Bastogne, Belgium, in the temporary foxholes of Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, U.S. Army, a bitter cold of minus 15 degrees Celsius cut through the air, driving snowflakes to lash at every soldier's face. Robert Mason, a 21-year-old radio telephone operator with Easy Company, huddled in the corner of his foxhole, his hands clutching a completely silent SCR-300 backpack radio so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Only 10 minutes earlier, the latest German artillery barrage had ended. Screaming 88mm anti-aircraft gun shells slammed into the ground around Easy Company's defensive positions one after another, sending clods of earth, ice, and shrapnel flying in all directions. A huge tear was ripped in the camouflage netting covering the foxhole, and a frigid wind rushed in instantly. Mason could clearly hear the suppressed coughs of his comrades nearby, as well as the low moans of a wounded soldier in agony, sounds that cut sharply through the silent pre-dawn darkness. He glanced down at the radio in his arms. Its metal casing was still stained with black scorch marks from the artillery fire. The communication wires he had checked repeatedly were now severed into several pieces, their inner cores exposed and frozen into stiff arcs by the ice and snow. This was the last line of communication between the company and the rear command post, and now it was completely dead. "Mason, can you fix that radio?" The voice of Captain Richard Winters, the company commander, came from the entrance of the foxhole, hoarse and laced with unmistakable anxiety. Captain Winters had just returned from reconnoitering the forward positions. His helmet was caked with thick snow, a shrapnel gash tore through the cuff of his field jacket, and the arm beneath was crusted with frost. He ducked into the foxhole, his gaze locking directly on Mason and the radio in his arms. Behind him stood two staff officers, their faces grim and solemn. Mason shook his head vigorously, his voice trembling with cold intention. "No, sir. The wires are all blown apart, and the battery's dead. The spare battery was destroyed in that last barrage. There's no way to fix it." He paused, then added, "I tried to splice the wires back together, but there are too many breaks, and with the temperature this low out there, the cores are so brittle they snap if you so much as bend them. It's impossible to make a solid connection." Captain Winters fell silent. He leaned against the icy wall of the foxhole, pulled a crumpled map from his pocket, and unfolded it by the dim light of a flashlight. The map was marked in red ink with Easy Company's current position, surrounded by a dense ring of German unit markers, a complete encirclement. "They've got us pinned down," Captain Winters said, his voice low, making the atmosphere in the foxhole even more suffocating. "The vanguard of the German 2nd Panzer Division has seized the high ground to our east and north. To the west is an open snowfield with zero cover, and the south is their supply line, heavily guarded. Right now, we're cut off and alone." Mason's heart skipped a beat. He knew exactly what being surrounded meant. As a radio telephone operator, he understood better than anyone the importance of rear support. Easy Company had been assigned a flanking mission, carrying only limited ammunition and supplies. After 2 days and nights of fierce fighting, each soldier now had an average of fewer than 10 rounds left for their rifles, only 2 belts of ammunition for the machine guns, and a pitifully small number of hand grenades. Worse still, the company had 17 wounded men. Medical supplies were exhausted, their wounds were dressed with little more than bandages to stem the bleeding, and in the freezing temperatures, their conditions were deteriorating rapidly. If they couldn't re-establish contact with the rear to call for reinforcements and supplies, Easy Company would face annihilation in a matter of hours. "Is there any other way to communicate?" Captain Winters turned to the communications officer beside him. "Sir, our wire communications were taken out by German artillery yesterday afternoon. Every piece of communication equipment we have is either damaged or completely out of commission," the communications officer replied helplessly. "We tried firing signal flares earlier, but this area is covered by German anti-aircraft fire. The flares were shot down as soon as they lifted off. There's no way the rear could have seen them." Dead silence fell over the foxhole, broken only by the howl of the wind outside and the distant, occasional rumble of German tank engines. The sound grew closer with every passing second, like the footsteps of death, pressing down on everyone until they could barely breathe. Mason took a deep breath of the icy air, forcing himself to stay calm. He remembered his training as a radiotelephone operator. His instructor had drilled into them that their core duty was to ensure the transmission of information, no matter the cost, even if it meant delivering messages on foot, the most primitive method possible. Back then, he had thought it was just a slogan. In modern warfare, radios and wire communications were the backbone of operations. But now those words were their only hope. He looked up at Captain Winters. "Sir, I volunteer for a mission." Captain Winters froze for a moment, then realized what Mason was suggesting. A flicker of surprise followed by hesitation crossed his face. "Mason, do you understand what this means? To break through the German encirclement, you'll have to cross at least 10 kilometers of snow. The entire route is crawling with German patrols and outposts. You'll have no heavy weapons, only your wits. If you're caught, the consequences don't bear thinking about." "I understand, sir," Mason said firmly. He stood up, brushing the snow off his uniform. "But it's the only option we have right now. I'm a radio telephone operator. I know the location of the rear command post and the recognition codes by heart. And I've got a working knowledge of this area's terrain from mapping our communication lines earlier. If I can break through successfully and get our position and situation to headquarters, I can buy the company a chance at rescue." The other soldiers in the foxhole looked up at Mason. Some wore expressions of admiration, others concern. An infantry squad leader who was friendly with Mason spoke up. "Mason, this is suicide. Can't we think of another way?" "There is no other way," Mason shook his head. "Every minute we waste puts us in a worse position. We're running out of time." He turned back to Captain Winters. "Sir, please give me this chance. I swear I'll get the job done." Captain Winters stared at Mason for a full 30 seconds. In his eyes, he saw unwavering resolve and determination. He knew Mason was right. This was the only hope for saving Easy Company. He nodded, his voice heavy with gravity. "All right, I approve your request. I'll have the staff officers compile a detailed intelligence report, our exact coordinates, troop disposition, the status of the wounded, and the approximate perimeter of the German encirclement. Whatever equipment you need, name it. I need a spare German field uniform, a combat knife, a small amount of K-rations and a canteen, plus a simplified topographical sketch," Mason said without hesitation. "The German uniform will help me blend in better for stealth movement in the snow. The knife is for self-defense. The K-rations and canteen will keep me going physically. The topographical sketch will help me stay on course." "Done!" Captain Winters immediately ordered the staff officers beside him to make the preparations. "Additionally, I'll assign 2 soldiers to escort you to the edge of the encirclement. They'll clear out any nearby German sentries to give you a head start on your breakout. Remember, your first priority is your own safety. Only if you survive can you deliver the intelligence. If you hit an impassable obstacle, don't push your luck. Abort the mission if necessary and go to ground to wait for rescue." "Understood, sir." Mason saluted with crisp precision. Moments later, the staff officers returned with everything Mason had requested. A German M43 field uniform, worn but intact, along with a German steel helmet, an M3 fighting knife, its blade razor-sharp, the handle wrapped in non-slip cloth, a small packet of K-rations, enough to sustain him for 2 days, a canteen filled with hot water, wrapped in a cotton cloth to prevent freezing, and a simplified topographical sketch drawn on waterproof paper, marked in marker with his breakout route, the positions of German outposts to avoid, and the coordinates of the rear command post. Mason changed into the German uniform quickly, pulling on the steel helmet. Of average build, he looked surprisingly convincing in the enemy's attire. He tucked the intelligence report and topographical sketch carefully into an inner pocket of the uniform, then strapped the knife to his waist and slung the K-rations and canteen over his shoulder. Once he was ready, he saluted Captain Winters again. "Sir, I'm ready to move out." Captain Winters clapped him on the shoulder, his eyes filled with quiet hope. "Good luck, Mason. The fate of Easy Company rests in your hands." The 2 escort soldiers were already waiting at the entrance to the foxhole, their M1 Garand rifles loaded and at the ready, scanning the surrounding area vigilantly for any sign of movement. Mason followed them out, ducking his head against the wind. Outside, the snowfall had intensified, large flakes swirling down thick and fast, reducing visibility to less than 10 meters. The cold wind cut at his face like a knife, stinging sharply. In the distance, faint gunfire echoed from the German lines, mixed with the crunch of tank treads grinding over the snow, sounds that sent a chill down every soldier's spine. The escort soldiers led the way, treading lightly to minimize noise. Mason followed close behind, his eyes sweeping the area constantly, his hands clamped tightly around the knife at his waist. He knew that from the moment he stepped out of the foxhole, his breakout mission had begun in earnest. Every step of this 10-kilometer trek through the snow could be his last. German patrols could appear at any moment. The freezing terrain could trap him without warning. And the intelligence he carried was Easy Company's only hope. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now, not ever. After walking for about 20 minutes, they reached a weak point in the German encirclement. A dense stand of trees, their branches crisscrossing to provide decent cover. The escort soldiers halted and one of them whispered to Mason, "50 meters ahead is the first German outpost. We've reconned it, only one sentry, and it's the gap between shifts, so his guard is down. We'll draw his attention away. You take the chance to slip past, then head south along the edge of the woods, sticking to the route marked on the map." Mason nodded, taking a deep breath to steel himself for the dash ahead. One of the escort soldiers pulled a stone from his pocket and hurled it forcefully into the woods to the left. The stone hit the ground with a soft thud. Immediately, movement erupted from the direction of the outpost. A German sentry emerged, rifle raised, scanning the area where the sound had come from, muttering something in German under his breath. "Now, go!" the other escort soldier hissed. Mason dropped into a crouch and sprinted forward like a sleek cheetah, darting past the outpost position. He didn't dare look back, focusing all his energy on running as fast as he could. The snow crunched loudly under his boots. He could hear the German sentry shout a challenge behind him, followed by the metallic click of a rifle bolt being pulled back. Seconds later, several shots rang out, shattering the silence of the night. Bullets whistled past him, slamming into the tree trunks nearby and sending splinters flying. "Keep going! Don't look back!" the escort soldiers shouted behind him. Mason didn't pause, sprinting onward until he had plunged deep into the heart of the forest. He didn't stop running until he'd covered nearly a kilometer, and the sound of gunfire and shouting had faded completely into the distance. Leaning against a thick tree trunk, he gasped for breath, the icy air burning his lungs like fire. He glanced back in the direction he'd come from, seeing nothing but an endless expanse of white snow and tangled tree branches. There was no sign of the escort soldiers. He had no way of knowing if they were alive or dead, but he knew he couldn't dwell on it. He had to keep moving forward to honor their sacrifice. He steadied his breathing, pulled the topographical sketch from his pocket, and studied it by the dim light of the moon. After confirming his current position and the route ahead, he tucked the sketch back into his pocket. By now, the snow was falling harder than ever, the moon obscured by thick clouds plunging the forest into deeper darkness. He pulled the German uniform tighter around himself, pushing the steel helmet down to shade most of his face. Then he ducked his head and vanished into the depths of the woods, beginning the most perilous leg of his stealth journey. As he pressed forward, he suddenly heard the sound of footsteps and voices in the distance, speaking German. Mason's heart skipped a beat. He froze instantly, darting behind a massive tree trunk, holding his breath as he peered cautiously around the edge. Approximately 5 German soldiers, a patrol unit, were walking straight toward him. Each carried a rifle, hand grenades hanging from their belts, chatting casually among themselves. The patrol wore the same M43 field uniforms as him, their figures standing out sharply against the snow. Mason's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew that if he was discovered, it would mean certain death. He gripped the knife at his waist tightly, tensing his muscles for a fight. At the same time, he forced himself to stay calm, his mind racing to formulate a plan. He was wearing a German uniform. If he kept his mouth shut, maybe he could bluff his way past them. But he didn't speak a word of German. If the patrol questioned him, his cover would be blown immediately. The patrol drew closer until they were less than 10 meters from the tree where Mason hid. He could hear their footsteps clearly, smell the tobacco and sweat on their uniforms. He held his breath, pressing his body as flat against the tree trunk as possible. doing his best to make himself invisible. Just then, one of the German soldiers suddenly stopped, turning to glance in the direction of Mason's hiding spot and shouted something in German. Mason's heart leaped into his throat. He knew he might have been spotted. His fingers tightened around the knife, ready to charge at a moment's notice. In that split second of crisis, a single gunshot rang out sharply in the air, shattering the forest's silence. The German patrols snapped to attention instantly, raising their rifles and staring in the direction of the shot. Seizing the opportunity, Mason slipped quietly around to the other side of the tree, using the forest cover to back away slowly. He had no idea where the gunshot had come from. It could have been American soldiers engaging the enemy elsewhere, or even a case of friendly fire among the Germans. But he knew it was his chance to escape. He didn't dare linger, turning and running in the opposite direction. He didn't stop until he'd covered another 500 meters, pausing only to confirm that the patrol wasn't following him before allowing himself to relax slightly. The close call had taught Mason to be even more cautious. He realized that danger lurked around every corner in this German-controlled territory. He adjusted his route, choosing to stick to the densest, most rugged parts of the forest to avoid German patrols. He also slowed his pace significantly, pausing every few steps to scan the area for threats before moving forward again. Time dragged on, and the sky gradually lightened with the first faint streaks of dawn. The snow had stopped falling, but the bitter cold showed no signs of abating. Mason's strength was rapidly fading, his legs growing heavier with each step. He unslung his canteen from his shoulder, unscrewed the cap, and took a small sip of warm water. Then he pulled out a piece of K-ration hardtack, chewing it slowly. The biscuit was dry and rock-hard, almost impossible to swallow, but he forced himself to eat it, knowing he needed the energy to keep going. He glanced up at the sky to orient himself, then pressed onward. According to the topographical sketch, he had already covered about 3 kilometers. 7 more to go before reaching the rear command post. Those 7 kilometers were fraught with unknown dangers. He had no way of knowing what lay ahead, or if he would ever make it to his destination. But the thought of his trapped comrades in easy company gave him no room for retreat. He had to keep going. As he continued his journey, he suddenly heard a faint rustling sound ahead. He froze, ducking behind another tree to peer cautiously forward. Approximately 30 meters away stood a temporary German outpost. A single German sentry paced back and forth beside it, scanning the surrounding area vigilantly. A small tent was pitched next to the outpost, and there were faint signs of movement coming from inside, indicating that more German soldiers were stationed there. Mason cursed silently to himself. The outpost stood directly in his path. Going around it would force him to take a long, circuitous detour, increasing his chances of running into more German patrols. Charging through it head-on was a suicide mission with little chance of success. He had to find a way to get past the outpost undetected. He studied the outpost carefully, noting that the sentry was extremely vigilant, sweeping his gaze across the area every few minutes. And the occasional sounds from inside the tent confirmed that other German soldiers were present. After a moment of intense thought, he made the risky decision to try and bluff his way through, posing as a German soldier. Taking a deep breath, he straightened the German uniform, then stepped slowly out from behind the tree trunk and began walking toward the outpost. He did his best to make his gait appear natural, his face expressionless. "Halt! Who goes there?" The German sentry spotted him immediately, raising his rifle and pointing it directly at him, his voice sharp with authority. Mason stopped in his tracks, keeping his head bowed, refusing to speak. He knew that opening his mouth would give him away instantly. The sentry frowned at his silence, walking slowly toward him while muttering something in German. Mason's heart hammered against his chest, his hand tightening around the knife at his waist, ready to react to any sudden move. Just as the sentry reached him and raised a hand to lift his steel helmet, Mason struck. He snapped his head up, his eyes blazing with resolve. His right hand flashed to his waist, drawing the M3 fighting knife in a lightning-fast motion, and drove it straight into the sentry's throat. The German soldier's eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening to scream. But it was too late. The sharp blade sliced through his windpipe in an instant, and blood gushed forth in a warm spray. Mason didn't hesitate for a second. His left hand clamped over the sentry's mouth to muffle any sound. Then he twisted the knife sharply to ensure the kill. Seconds later, the sentry's body went limp. Mason dragged the corpse quickly into the nearby woods, covering it with a thick layer of snow to hide the evidence. Then he scanned the area around the outpost frantically, confirming that no other German soldiers had witnessed the attack before sprinting past the outpost and continuing on his way. Once he was safely past the outpost, Mason didn't dare slow down, pushing himself to run faster. His heart was still pounding violently in his chest, the memory of what he'd done sending a chill through him, despite the cold. It was the first time he had ever killed someone with his own hands. Even though it had been necessary for his survival and the success of his mission, a flood of conflicting emotions washed over him. He ran for nearly a kilometer before he finally managed to calm himself down. He knew that his actions, while successful, might have attracted the attention of other German soldiers. He had to pick up the pace to put as much distance as possible between himself and the outpost. He checked the topographical sketch again, confirming that he was still on the correct route, and pressed onward toward the rear command post. At approximately 10 a.m., Mason finally spotted the faint outline of an American military position in the distance. A surge of elation washed over him, and he quickened his pace. But he didn't rush straight toward it. Instead, he ducked into the nearby woods to observe the position carefully, making sure it was indeed held by American forces before stepping out and waving his hands in the air. The American soldiers on the position spotted him immediately, raising their rifles and shouting a challenge. "Halt! Who goes there?" "I'm Robert Mason, radiotelephone operator with Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division," Mason shouted, raising his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. "I have critical intelligence for headquarters." The American soldiers watched him warily, their rifles still trained on him. He was, after all, wearing a German uniform. An officer approached, studying him closely before speaking. "What proof do you have that you're an American soldier?" Mason pulled his dog tags and the intelligence report from Captain Winters out of the inner pocket of his German uniform. "These are my dog tags, sir, and this is the intelligence report from Easy Company, signed by Captain Winters." The officer took the dog tags and report, examining them carefully. After confirming their authenticity, he gestured for the soldiers to lower their rifles. "Come with me. I'll take you to see the headquarters staff." Mason followed the officer into the position, and for the first time since he'd left Easy Company's foxhole, he allowed himself to relax. He'd done it. He'd completed his mission. Easy Company was going to be saved. At that moment, his strength gave out completely. His legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed to the ground. As darkness closed in around him, the last thing he saw in his mind's eye was the hopeful faces of his comrades in Easy Company. To truly understand Easy Company's desperate predicament, we must rewind to the sudden outbreak of the battle that would come to be known as the Battle of the Bulge, codenamed Operation Wacht dem Rhein by the Germans. At 5:30 a.m. on December the 16th, 1944, Nazi Germany launched the largest counteroffensive of the Western Front during World War II in the Ardennes forest region. It was a desperate gamble by Adolf Hitler, aimed at concentrating overwhelming force to break through the Allied lines, drive straight to the port of Antwerp, split the British and American armies, and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. The German attack was marked by extreme secrecy and surprise. To achieve tactical surprise, the Germans implemented strict security measures. All troop movements were conducted at night, with vehicles traveling with their lights off and soldiers forbidden from using radio communications. Fires were banned in forward positions to avoid giving away their location through smoke. Meanwhile, the Germans massed elite forces, a total of 29 divisions, including 7 panzer divisions and 1 panzer grenadier division, amounting to approximately 250,000 troops, supported by 600 tanks, 1,900 artillery pieces, and mortars. The core German tactic was the armored spearhead breakthrough followed by infantry exploitation. Fast-moving armored units would punch through weak points in the Allied lines, followed by infantry to secure the gains and cut off the supply lines and retreat routes of encircled Allied forces. At the time, however, the Allied forces were in a state of strategic regroupment, completely unprepared for the German counteroffensive. The Allied defenses in the Ardennes sector were held by the U.S. First Army and Third Army, with relatively weak forces, only 6 divisions, totaling around 83,000 troops, equipped with 182 tanks and 394 artillery pieces. The defensive line stretched over 115 kilometers, resulting in an extremely thin troop density of just 700 men per kilometer. Compounding the problem, Allied intelligence had failed to detect the German troop buildup. Prior intelligence assessments had concluded that Germany no longer possessed the capability to launch a large-scale offensive, dismissing the Ardennes as a quiet sector. At dawn on December 16, 1944, the German artillery barrage erupted, heralding the start of the offensive. 1,900 artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously, launching a devastating attack on Allied forward positions, communication hubs, and artillery emplacements. American wire communication lines were destroyed on a massive scale in the first wave of shelling, and radio communications were thrown into chaos by jamming and equipment damage. Immediately following the artillery preparation, German armored forces launched their assault. Armored columns consisting of Tiger II heavy tanks and Panther medium tanks with their thick armor and powerful firepower smashed through the weak American defensive lines with ease. Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division was caught in this encircling maneuver and trapped. In the early morning of December 17th, Easy Company received orders to advance as the vanguard to a woodland 12 kilometers southwest of Bastogne, tasked with reconnaissance and security to cover the redeployment of the main Allied forces. At full strength, Easy Company numbered 140 men. 128 soldiers participated in this mission, equipped with 12 M19 1904 light machine guns, 3 M2 HB heavy machine guns, 660 mm mortars, and standard-issue M1 Garand semi-automatic rifles, and M1911 pistols for each soldier. This firepower was sufficient for routine reconnaissance and security duties, but woefully inadequate to withstand an assault by German armored forces. Easy Company's flanking advance initially proceeded smoothly. By noon on December 17th, they had reached their designated area and quickly began constructing temporary defensive positions. The positions were anchored along the edge of the woodland, with foxholes and communication trenches dug, barbed wire and anti-tank obstacles in place, and machine guns and mortars positioned on high ground to create interlocking fields of fire. Captain Winters divided the company into 3 combat teams: a forward security team, a main defense team, and a logistics support team. The communications section, including Mason, was responsible for maintaining radio and wire communications with battalion headquarters. The situation took a catastrophic turn at 3 p.m. on December 17. The vanguard of the German 2nd Panzer Division, the 1st Battalion, 2nd Panzer Regiment, had broken through the main American defensive lines and advanced rapidly to the high ground east of Easy Company's position. Upon detecting Easy Company's defensive positions, the Germans launched an immediate attack without hesitation. 3 Panther medium tanks led the charge toward the forward security team, their 75 mm tank guns firing armor-piercing rounds that slammed into the American positions. 2 forward foxholes were destroyed instantly, killing 5 soldiers outright. "Enemy attack! Anti-tank teams, move into position!" the leader of the forward security team shouted. Easy Company's 2 anti-tank teams sprang into action immediately, grabbing their bazooka rocket launchers and charging toward the German tanks. But the bazooka's armor penetration capability was limited to just 127 millimeters, while the Panther's frontal armor was 80 millimeters thick and sloped at an angle, providing effective protection equivalent to over 120 millimeters. The 2 bazooka gunners fired 4 rockets in quick succession, but none managed to penetrate the tank armor. Instead, they were cut down by the tank's coaxial machine guns. 1 killed instantly, the other seriously wounded. The forward security team was forced to fall back, linking up with the main defense team. Captain Winters immediately ordered the line to contract, concentrating fire on the German infantry advancing behind the tanks. The M19 19A 4 light machine guns and M2 HB heavy machine guns opened fire simultaneously, creating a dense wall of lead that mowed down wave after wave of German infantry. But the German tank assault showed no signs of slowing. The three Panthers continued to advance relentlessly, their tank guns pounding Easy Company's firing positions. By 4 p.m., one of Easy Company's mortar positions was hit by a tank shell, killing all the crew and destroying the mortar. The most devastating blow, however, was the loss of communications. At 4:30 p.m., a second German artillery barrage struck, specifically targeting Easy Company's communication hub. A 150-millimeter artillery shell landed directly beside the communication section's foxhole, destroying it completely and severing all wire communication lines. Mason and another radiotelephone operator immediately grabbed spare wire and attempted to repair the lines. But as soon as they climbed out of the foxhole, they came under heavy German machine gun fire. The other radiotelephone operator was hit and killed instantly. Mason barely managed to scramble back to safety, but the spare wire was destroyed in the process. With wire communications down, radio became their only lifeline. Mason operated the SCR-300 backpack radio, attempting to establish contact with battalion headquarters. The SCR-300 was the standard backpack radio used by U.S. forces during World War II, operating on a frequency range of 2 to 4.5 megahertz with a communication range of approximately 8 kilometers. It used crystal-controlled frequencies for good stability, but its anti-jamming capability was poor. Plagued by electromagnetic interference from the German artillery fire, the radio signal was extremely weak. Mason could only pick up fragmented snippets of instructions from battalion headquarters, unable to transmit a clear message about Easy Company's dire situation. At 5 p.m., the German 2nd Panzer Division's follow-up forces arrived on the scene, including an infantry battalion and 2 Tiger II heavy tanks. German strength swelled to over 800 men, forming a semi-encirclement of Easy Company. Captain Winters attempted once more to contact battalion headquarters by radio to request reinforcements. But by this time, the radio's battery was nearly depleted, and the signal died completely. Mason swapped in a spare battery, allowing the radio to function briefly. He managed to transmit a partial message: under attack by German armored forces, requesting immediate reinforcements. But before he could finish, another artillery strike hit, shrapnel damaging the radio and rendering it permanently inoperable. By the evening of December 17, the Germans had completed their full encirclement of Easy Company. They occupied the high ground to the east, north, and south, while the west was an open snowfield with no cover whatsoever. The Germans halted their offensive, instead beginning to construct defensive works to seal off all breakout routes, intent on starving Easy Company into submission. By this point, Easy Company had suffered 32 casualties, 15 killed in action, and 17 seriously wounded, leaving only 96 effective fighting troops. The shortage of supplies also became a critical issue. Easy Company's initial ammunition loadout was as follows: 60 rounds per rifleman, 1,000 rounds per light machine gun, 5,000 rounds per heavy machine gun, and 120 rounds per mortar. After the afternoon's fierce fighting, each rifleman had an average of just 15 rounds left, each light machine gun fewer than 300 rounds, each heavy machine gun less than 1,500 rounds, and the only remaining operational mortar had a mere 30 rounds left. Food and drinking water were also critically low, with each soldier having only 2 days' worth of K rations and half a canteen of water left. As night fell, the temperature plummeted to minus 15 degrees Celsius, turning the bitter cold into yet another enemy. The soldiers were dressed in thin field uniforms with no adequate cold weather gear, forced to huddle together in their foxholes for warmth. The condition of the seriously wounded was particularly dire. With medical supplies exhausted, their wounds could not be properly treated, and in the freezing temperatures, they began to fester and become infected. One by one, the wounded succumbed to infection and blood loss. At 1 a.m. on December 18th, the Germans launched a small-scale night attack, attempting to probe the strength of Easy Company's defenses. German soldiers advanced quietly toward the American positions under the cover of tanks, but were detected by the forward sentries. Easy Company opened fire immediately, repelling the German attack after a half-hour-long firefight, but at the cost of 5 more casualties. By this point, Each rifleman had fewer than 10 rounds left, and machine gun ammunition was nearly exhausted. At 3 a.m., the latest German artillery barrage began, the same barrage that Mason had endured at the start of our story. The shelling lasted for 10 minutes, inflicting further heavy damage on Easy Company's defensive positions, destroying more foxholes and wounding 3 additional soldiers. When the barrage finally ended, Easy Company's last remaining lines of communication with the outside world were severed completely. The company was trapped, out of ammunition and supplies, facing certain doom. Captain Winters called a meeting of the remaining officers and non-commissioned officers to discuss breakout and rescue options, but with all communication equipment destroyed, the meeting quickly reached a dead end. To fully grasp the odds stacked against Easy Company, it is essential to analyze the critical equipment gap between the two sides, a gap that directly contributed to the extreme difficulty of Mason's breakout mission. On the German side, the 2nd Panzer Division, the unit responsible for encircling Easy Company, was an elite armored formation equipped with some of the most advanced tanks of World War II. The Panther medium tank and the Tiger II heavy tank. The Panther was armed with a 75mm KWK 42L70 tank gun with an effective range of 2,000 meters and formidable armor-piercing capability, able to penetrate the frontal armor of the American M4 Sherman tank at a distance of 1,500 meters. Its frontal armor was 80 millimeters thick, sloped at a 55-degree angle, providing exceptional defensive performance. The Tiger II heavy tank was even more fearsome, armed with an 88mm KWK 43L71 tank gun with an effective range of 2,500 meters. Its frontal armor was a staggering 150 millimeters thick, sloped at 40 degrees, making it nearly impervious to most American anti-tank weapons at the time. On the American side, Easy Company as an infantry unit lacked effective anti-tank capabilities. The bazooka rocket launcher was underpowered, unable to pose a serious threat to German heavy tanks. The standard-issue M1 Garand semi-automatic rifle, while fast-firing and accurate, was useless against armored vehicles. Easy Company's machine guns and mortars were only effective against German infantry, with minimal destructive power against tanks. This equipment gap left Easy Company in a purely defensive position against the German armored assault, unable to mount any meaningful counterattack. In terms of communication equipment, the American SCR-300 backpack radio, while advanced for its time, was limited by the technological constraints of the era, with poor anti-jamming capability and reliability issues. In the harsh environment of the Ardennes, with constant German artillery jamming and freezing temperatures, the radio was prone to frequent malfunctions. The German communication equipment, such as the Fuji 5 radio, had superior anti-jamming capability and longer communication range, allowing the Germans to coordinate their forces efficiently and form a tight encirclement. Furthermore, the Germans were far better prepared for winter combat. Their soldiers were equipped with M43 field uniforms, cold weather hats, and thick gloves, enabling them to operate effectively in the minus 15 degrees Celsius temperatures. In contrast, American soldiers lacked adequate cold weather gear. Many were still wearing summer field uniforms, and their combat effectiveness plummeted rapidly in the bitter cold. This logistical gap only served to worsen Easy Company's desperate situation. Returning to Mason's breakout mission, the German M43 field uniform he wore was the standard cold weather attire for German troops. Made from a windproof and water-resistant gray-green fabric with a thin cotton lining, it provided essential protection against the cold, a critical factor that allowed him to survive the 10-kilometer trek through the freezing snow. The M3 fighting knife he carried was the standard close-quarters combat weapon for U.S. forces, measuring 25.4 centimeters in total length with a 15.2-centimeter blade made from high-carbon steel. Its exceptional sharpness made it ideal for both cutting and stabbing, proving instrumental in his ability to take down the German sentry at the outpost. By this point, Mason had been traveling through the snow for hours, his strength nearly drained. But he had no way of knowing that Easy Company's situation was growing even more desperate by the minute. At 8 a.m. on December 18th, after discovering that a soldier had broken out of the encirclement, the Germans intensified their attack on Easy Company's positions. Two Tiger, two heavy tanks, and three Panther medium tanks launched a coordinated assault, supported by German infantry advancing in waves from three directions. Easy Company soldiers fought back valiantly, using their dwindling ammunition to mow down the attacking infantry, but against the advancing tanks they had no choice but to resort to hand grenades and satchel charges in close-range attacks. One soldier, clutching a satchel charge, crept quietly toward a Panther tank under the cover of early morning mist. He placed the charge beneath the tank's tracks, lit the fuse, and fled to safety. A deafening explosion followed, destroying the tank's tracks and immobilizing it. But the crew inside continued to fire their tank gun and machine guns relentlessly. Another soldier attempted to climb onto the tank to drop a hand grenade into the turret hatch, but was cut down by the tank's coaxial machine gun, sacrificing his life in the attempt. The fighting raged on until 10 a.m., when Easy Company's ammunition finally ran out completely. Captain Winters ordered the remaining soldiers to fight on with bayonets, entrenching tools, and even rocks in hand-to-hand combat. By this point, Easy Company had only 78 effective fighting troops left, with the number of seriously wounded rising to 22. Many soldiers were rendered combat ineffective by the cold and hunger. Captain Winters knew that his men couldn't hold out much longer. Their only hope lay with Mason, that he would succeed in his breakout mission and bring back reinforcements. Meanwhile, Mason had just passed the second German outpost, pressing onward toward the rear command post. He had no way of knowing the latest developments at Easy Company's positions, or that every step he took was buying his comrades precious time. The journey ahead would bring even more dangers: German patrols, treacherous terrain, and the unrelenting cold. But his resolve never wavered. His sole mission was to deliver the intelligence to headquarters as quickly as possible, to bring rescue to his trapped comrades. At 10:15 a.m. on December 18th, after passing the second German outpost, Mason entered a more rugged, hilly area. The terrain was crisscrossed with gullies and covered in snow over 30 centimeters deep, every step requiring a tremendous expenditure of energy. The German M43 field uniform provided some protection against the cold, but after hours of walking through the snow, the frigid wind had found its way through the fabric's gaps, causing his body to tremble uncontrollably. By this point, Mason had covered 3 kilometers of his journey, with 7 more kilometers to go before reaching the rear command post. According to his original plan, he was supposed to follow a path along the edge of the woods southward, avoiding the main German troop concentrations. But his earlier detour to evade the German patrol had forced him off course, into this unfamiliar hilly terrain. He pulled out the topographical sketch, studying it carefully in the sunlight, trying to reorient himself. The sketch provided only a rough outline of the hilly area, marking just a few key landmarks, making it extremely difficult for him to determine his exact position. At 10:40 a.m., Mason reached the edge of a gully, planning to slide down its slope to conserve energy. Just as he bent down to begin his descent, he heard the sound of German voices coming from above. He froze instantly, dropping to the ground and pressing his body into the snow, raising his head just enough to peer cautiously upward. A patrol of 5 German soldiers was walking along the path above the gully, their pace slow as they searched the area methodically. Mason's heart tightened with fear. He knew that if the patrol spotted him, he would be defenseless. He pressed his body flat against the snow, holding his breath, and did his best to make himself as small as possible, using the snow and weeds along the gully's edge for camouflage. The German patrol drew closer, and he could hear their conversation clearly, even see the SS insignia on their helmets. This was an elite German patrol unit, highly trained in search and destroy operations. The German patrol lingered above the gully for approximately 5 minutes. One of the soldiers glanced down in Mason's direction. Mason's heart skipped a beat, his body remaining perfectly still, afraid even to breathe. Fortunately, the soldier didn't spot him. He simply muttered something in German and continued walking with the patrol. Only when the patrol's figures had disappeared completely from sight did Mason allow himself to breathe again. Climbing to his feet, his uniform covered in snowflakes, his body shaking violently from the cold and fear. At 11:20 a.m., Mason reached the edge of a forest, 5 kilometers away from the rear command post. He paused to rest, unslinging his canteen and taking a small sip of warm water. The water had already turned lukewarm, and the cotton cloth wrapping the canteen was crusted with a thin layer of ice. He pulled out another piece of K-ration hardtack, chewing it quickly. The combination of constant movement and extreme mental stress had drained his energy reserves completely. He needed every calorie he could get to keep going. As he replenished his energy, he suddenly heard the sound of barking in the distance. Mason tensed instantly, his senses sharpening. He knew that the Germans frequently used military dogs for search operations, and that these dogs had an extremely keen sense of smell, capable of tracking human scent even in the snow. He quickly stowed his canteen and hardtack, darting into the depths of the forest to hide behind a massive tree trunk. Moments later, he spotted 3 German soldiers approaching, leading 2 military dogs on leashes. The dogs' barks grew louder with every step, and Mason could see them sniffing the snow eagerly, barking repeatedly at the surrounding trees. He pressed his body tightly against the tree trunk, his hand tightening around the knife at his waist, ready to fight for his life if necessary. At the same time, he forced his breathing to slow, trying to minimize the scent of sweat and blood that might attract the dogs. It is worth examining the German search tactics employed during the Battle of the Bulge. To hunt down Allied soldiers attempting to break out of encirclements, the Germans utilized a 3-pronged strategy: zone-based search, military dog tracking, and fire support blockades. They divided occupied territories into multiple search zones, each patrolled by 1 or 2 units equipped with military dogs to conduct thorough sweeps of key areas. Once an Allied soldier was spotted, the patrol would launch an immediate attack and call for reinforcements via radio, establishing a fire blockade to prevent the soldier from escaping. This tactic was highly effective, with its wide search coverage and rapid response times posing a grave threat to any Allied soldier attempting to break through German lines. The military dogs drew closer, and one of them broke free from its leash, charging toward the tree where Mason was hiding, barking furiously. The German soldiers immediately tensed, raising their rifles and advancing toward the tree. Mason knew he had been discovered. He had to escape, and fast. He scanned his surroundings, spotting a narrow path behind the tree leading deeper into the forest. He made the split-second decision to risk a breakout along this path. Just as the German soldiers closed to within 10 meters of the tree, Mason burst from his hiding spot, sprinting toward the narrow path. The German soldiers reacted instantly, shouting loudly as they raised their rifles and opened fire. Bullets whistled past him, slamming into the tree trunk and sending splinters flying. The military dogs gave chase, their barks echoing behind him. Mason ran for his life, the snow crunching loudly under his boots. He could hear the dogs panting, growing closer, fear driving him to run faster than he had ever run before. He zigzagged constantly, using the trees in the forest to dodge the German gunfire and the pursuing dogs. After running for approximately 300 meters, he spotted a steep slope ahead, its base covered in dense underbrush. Without hesitation, he jumped off the slope, tumbling into the underbrush below. The branches of the underbrush tore at his face and arms, leaving painful gashes, but he didn't stop to tend to his wounds. He scrambled to his feet and dove deeper into the underbrush, curling up tightly and holding his breath. The military dogs reached the edge of the slope, barking furiously at the underbrush below, but the dense vegetation prevented them from charging down after him. The German soldiers stood at the top of the slope for approximately 10 minutes, firing repeatedly into the underbrush, before finally giving up and leaving with the dogs. Only when the sound of the soldiers' footsteps and the dogs' barks had faded completely did Mason emerge from the underbrush. His face and arms were covered in cuts, blood seeping from the wounds and quickly freezing in the cold air. He grabbed a handful of clean snow, using it to wipe the blood from his wounds, then continued his journey. By this point, his strength was at its limit. Blisters had formed and burst on his feet, every step sending a sharp pain shooting up his legs. But he knew he couldn't stop. His comrades in easy company were counting on him. At 12:30 p.m., Mason finally exited the hilly terrain, entering a relatively flat forested area. According to the topographical sketch, once he crossed this forest, he would only have 2 kilometers left to reach the outer perimeter of the American Rear Command Post. A flicker of hope reignited in his chest, and his steps lightened slightly, but he didn't allow himself to lower his guard. After surviving so many close calls, he knew that the closer he got to his destination, the more dangerous the journey became. At 1:40 p.m., Mason emerged from the forest and an open snowfield stretched out before him. According to the sketch, he needed to cross this snowfield to reach the outer perimeter of the rear command post. The snowfield was completely exposed, offering no cover whatsoever from German observation. Mason scanned the area carefully, spotting a dry riverbed along the edge of the snowfield. Though the riverbed was also covered in snow, it provided far better cover than the open snowfield. He decided to follow the edge of the riverbed, using its terrain to conceal his movements. He ducked into the riverbed, walking slowly along its edge. The snow in the riverbed was deeper than ever, reaching above his knees, slowing his progress to a crawl. At approximately 2 p.m., he suddenly heard the sound of German voices nearby. He froze instantly, hiding behind a large boulder to observe. 6 German soldiers were erecting barbed wire fences across the snowfield, with a motorcycle parked nearby. Clearly, they were reinforcing their defensive positions. Mason's heart sank. He knew he had to find a way around this area to continue his journey. He studied the German soldiers' positions carefully, noting that they were all concentrated on one side of the barbed wire fence, with the other side completely unguarded. He decided to wait for the right moment to slip across the fence undetected while the soldiers were distracted. He waited behind the boulder for approximately 20 minutes. During that time, 2 German soldiers walked near the riverbed, but failed to spot him. At 2:25 p.m., a burst of gunfire echoed in the distance. The German soldiers snapped to attention instantly, raising their rifles and staring in the direction of the gunfire. Mason knew this was his chance. He burst from behind the boulder and sprinted toward the unguarded side of the barbed wire fence. The German soldiers spotted him almost immediately, shouting loudly as they raised their rifles and opened fire. Bullets whistled past him, slamming into the snow and sending up clouds of powder. Mason ran as fast as his legs could carry him. Just as he was about to cross the fence, a bullet struck his calf, a searing pain exploding through his leg. He stumbled, nearly falling, but he refused to stop. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he pushed forward, finally scrambling across the fence and diving into the forest on the other side. Once he was safely in the forest, Mason allowed himself to stop, examining his wound. The bullet had passed clean through his calf, blood gushing from the entry and exit wounds. He tore a strip of cloth from his uniform, wrapping it tightly around the wound to stem the bleeding. The pain was excruciating, causing his body to shake violently, but he knew he was close to his destination. He couldn't afford to collapse now. He rested for approximately 10 minutes to ease the pain, then used a sturdy branch as a crutch, hobbling forward. At approximately 3 p.m., Mason finally spotted the faint outline of an American military position in the distance. Barbed wire fences and anti-tank obstacles surrounded the perimeter, and American soldiers patrolled the forward lines. A surge of elation washed over him, and he forgot his pain, quickening his pace. But he didn't rush straight toward the position. Instead, he ducked into the nearby woods to observe carefully, confirming that it was indeed an American position before stepping out and waving his hands in the air. The American soldiers on the position spotted him immediately, raising their rifles and shouting a challenge. "Halt! Who goes there?" "I'm Robert Mason, radiotelephone operator with Easy Company, 2nd Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division," Mason shouted, raising his hands slowly to show he meant no harm. His voice was weak and strained from pain and exhaustion. The American soldiers watched him warily, their rifles still trained on him. He was wearing a German uniform, after all, and his calf was bleeding profusely. An officer approached, studying him closely before speaking. "What proof do you have that you're an American soldier?" Mason pulled his dog tags and the intelligence report from Captain Winters out of the inner pocket of his German uniform. "These are my dog tags, sir, and this is the intelligence report from Easy Company, signed by Captain Winters." The officer took the dog tags and report, examining them carefully. After confirming their authenticity, he gestured to 2 soldiers beside him. "Quickly, get him to the medical station for treatment, then bring him to see the headquarters staff." The 2 soldiers rushed over, carefully lifting Mason off his feet and carrying him toward the medical station inside the position. As Mason lay in their arms, looking up at the familiar American uniforms and the military positions surrounding him, he finally allowed himself to relax completely. He'd done it. He'd succeeded. Easy Company was going to be saved. At that moment, his strength gave out completely, darkness closing in around him as he lost consciousness once more. After being taken to the medical station, Mason received immediate emergency treatment. The through-and-through wound to his calf was severe, but fortunately it had not hit any bones. Following treatment to stop the bleeding, clean the wound, and apply a bandage, his vital signs gradually stabilized. Meanwhile, upon receiving the intelligence report Mason had risked his life to deliver, the headquarters officers completed their situation assessment and rescue deployment in a mere 15 minutes. The report contained critical, detailed information: Easy Company's exact coordinates, the weak points in the German encirclement, the company's troop disposition, and their dire shortage of supplies, providing the precise intelligence needed to plan the rescue mission. Headquarters immediately issued orders for a combined rescue force to be formed, consisting of the 1st Battalion, 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division, and B Company, 3rd Armored Battalion. The force was equipped with 12 M4 Sherman tanks, 6 105mm howitzers, and over 300 elite soldiers. They were ordered to advance covertly along the reverse route of Mason's breakout to reach Easy Company's trap position. To avoid alerting the Germans, the rescue force adopted a silent advance tactic. Tanks shut down their engines and moved using only their tracks. Soldiers discarded any equipment that might make noise, carrying only essential weapons and supplies. The rescue force departed quietly at 3:30 p.m. Meanwhile, at Easy Company's position, the situation was growing increasingly desperate as the soldiers fought to hold back the German assault. At 4 p.m. on December 18th, the Germans launched their final full-scale attack. 2 Tiger II heavy tanks broke through Easy Company's frontal defenses, and German infantry poured into the breach. The remaining American soldiers fought back with bayonets, entrenching tools, and even rocks in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Captain Winters, wounded twice by bayonet thrusts, refused to leave his post, leading the remaining soldiers in forming a human wall to seal the breach in the line. Just as all hope seemed lost, the distant roar of M4 Sherman tank guns echoed through the air. The vanguard of the rescue force's tank unit had broken through the outer German blockade, launching an assault on the encircling forces. The Germans, who had been concentrating all their firepower on Easy Company, were thrown into disarray by the sudden appearance of the armored rescue force. While the American Sherman tanks were outmatched by the German Tiger IIs in terms of armor and firepower, they compensated with numerical superiority and flexible tactics, quickly splitting the German lines and using their 76mm tank guns to target the weaker side armor of the German tanks. At the same time, the accompanying howitzer unit quickly set up their positions, launching a devastating artillery barrage on German rear assembly areas, effectively suppressing German reinforcement efforts. When the trapped soldiers of Easy Company heard the sound of the rescue force's tank guns, they erupted with renewed fighting spirit. Captain Winters led his men in a fierce counterattack, catching the Germans in a pincer movement between the trapped company and the relief force. At 5:15 p.m., the rescue force successfully broke through the final German defensive line, linking up with the main body of Easy Company. By this point, Easy Company had only 63 effective fighting troops left. Of the 22 seriously wounded soldiers, 5 had succumbed to the cold and infection, but through sheer force of will, the company had held their position for a grueling 14 hours, waiting for the rescue that had finally arrived. Following the successful breakout and rescue mission, Mason's heroic deeds spread quickly throughout the 101st Airborne Division. His incredible feat of trekking 10 kilometers through enemy lines to deliver critical intelligence had not only saved the lives of every surviving member of Easy Company, but also played a vital role in stabilizing the Allied lines during the crucial early stages of the Battle of the Bulge. Post-battle statistics revealed that during their defense, Easy Company had killed a total of 127 German soldiers, destroyed 2 German tanks, and succeeded in pinning down a significant portion of the German 2nd Panzer Division's strength, creating favorable conditions for the subsequent Allied counteroffensive against Germany's Operation Wacht am Rhein. Notably, Mason's actions helped redefine the role of radiotelephone operators during the Battle of the Bulge. Prior to this, radiotelephone operators were often viewed as technical support personnel But Mason's story made the Allies realize that skilled radiotelephone operators could also serve as battlefield couriers and assault specialists. After the war, the U.S. Army awarded Mason the Silver Star Medal in recognition of his extraordinary bravery and outstanding contributions in the face of extreme danger. Easy Company, for its tenacious defense during the battle, was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. In January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge ended in an Allied victory. The German army suffered heavy losses in the campaign, over 120,000 casualties, more than 600 tanks destroyed, and 1,600 artillery pieces lost. Germany's ability to launch counteroffensives on the Western Front was completely shattered. Mason's story became a microcosm of the heroic deeds of countless ordinary soldiers during the battle. His feat of breaking through the enemy blockade on foot not only embodied the loyalty and courage of a soldier, but also revealed the essence of war. No matter how advanced technology becomes, human will and conviction are always the decisive factors in determining victory or defeat. After the war, Mason was discharged from the military early due to his injuries and returned to his hometown in the United States. But he never forgot his comrades in Easy Company, attending veterans' reunions every year. When asked about his breakout experience, he would always say calmly, "I just did what a radio telephone operator was supposed to do: deliver the intelligence and bring back hope." This simple sentence captured the mission and responsibility of countless battlefield radio telephone operators, ensuring that the story of the messenger in desperation would be forever etched in the historical monument of World War II. If you enjoyed today's true story of a World War II hero, don't forget to like, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss any more exciting interpretations of war history. Also, feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments section. What do you think was the hardest moment of Mason's breakout journey? Could you have held on in such a desperate situation? All right, that's all for today's video. We'll see you next time. Bye.